Hey y'all, it's Chey. Today I want to talk about something that if you've watched me before or if you know me, you probably know about, but in case you don't, I have ADHD. In this video, I want to talk about my experience growing up with ADHD, even though at the time, until recently, I had no idea I had it, what that was like, how I got diagnosed, and what life is like for me now. I really want to share my experience with all this because I think and I hope it could be helpful to a lot of people out there. There's a lot of questions, a lot of stigma, a lot of misdiagnosis when it comes to ADHD out there now, especially with TikTok. Don't get me started. So many women, other gender identities, other minorities are either misdiagnosed, very late to get diagnosed, or not diagnosed at all compared to their typically white male counterparts because of outdated standards, outdated testing, and outdated beliefs. I'm not going to go into the history of all that though. Instead, I'm going to put some links in the description of videos that do go into the history of that, explore and expand more on that if you're curious. Also, disclaimer, please do not use anything I say to completely self-diagnose yourself, and for the love of Vash the Stampede, do not use TikTok to self-diagnose yourself. My goal with this is to share my experiences with those who may be able to relate or see themselves in my story, and if you do relate a little too hard, I encourage you to go seek professional diagnosis if that's available to you. I understand that getting a professional diagnosis can be hard, in fact impossible for some people simply because of the monetary barrier. When I do say seek professional help or seek a professional opinion, I encourage you to reach out to whatever resources are available for you in anything more standardized than TikTok. But if you find strategies that do help you on TikTok, that help you to focus, that help calm your anxiety, by all means, please use them. There's no gatekeeping in trying to help someone mentally. If you find strategies that work for you, use them. Please just don't come out and diagnose yourself with things you see on the internet that are a little bit too relatable. I think y'all get the point. Anyway, part 2, disclaimer. At points in this video, I'm going to sound like I'm bragging on myself. I'm not. They're just to add context to this story. I didn't know I had ADHD until 2021. I'm 23 now. I was 21 when I found out. That's a pretty late diagnosis compared to a lot of people, which ties back into what I was mentioning earlier. But it also explains so much of my life. So now I'm 23. I'm living with ADHD. But let's take it back to the beginning. Part 1. Childhood Chey. This section, forewarning you, is going to be the longest because it's going to be a lot of setup for traits or characteristics that carry on throughout my life, so just bear with me. Childhood Chey is kind of hard to talk about because I don't really remember so much in detail like I do in later points in my life, like a lot of us do with childhood. I remember enough, but it's definitely not in the same level of detail as when I got older. And when I'm talking childhood Chey, I'm talking pre-12 years old, like 12 and under. But after going through the ADHD testing process, I have luckily been able to have a lot of conversations with people who did know me very well back then and get their takes on how I acted and see how that matches up with my memories. And so that is how I'm going to provide this information to you. As a young kid, I was absolutely full of energy, and most of that came out of my mouth. But that didn't come out quite right. I wouldn't shut up. Pretty much the same as I am now. I would not shut up. And I ran around, I played with everything I could get my hands on. I was a very active child. I was always trying to learn something new and ask a lot of questions. Simple questions were never enough for me. If I wanted to know something, if something caught my attention, it wasn't enough to just ask my parents, hey, why is the sky blue? I had to find out where, why, how, when, who. I wasn't satisfied until I pretty much knew every single daggum detail there was to know about that topic. I dug in like a rabid weasel, to put it lightly. My interests were all over the place, again, to put it lightly. You can see in my school memory book, which I'll put a few pictures of over here, that my career ambitions and aspirations changed pretty wildly just in a few short years. There seems like no connection or train of thought, but I can assure you that there was. What's funny to me, though, is that they're all very specific. Which, this leads me to another important point about childhood Chey. My specificity. Even as a child, I was very specific in several different ways. Whenever I would ask questions about whatever it may be, I needed specific answers. As I mentioned earlier, I was very analytical. I wanted to know how something came together, why it came together. I needed to see all the puzzle pieces and have them fit together in my brain. Otherwise, the puzzle wasn't complete. I couldn't make up the answers or the full picture in my brain. I needed the specific answer, the specific truth, if you will. And in being told to do something, I needed specific instructions. Put it over there. Nope. Over there. Where? Pick up your clothes. The clean ones or the dirty ones, and put them where? Not to mention, this wasn't helped by being very forgetful. Did you put it over there? Did I put what over where when? I do remember adults being constantly annoyed or frustrated with me because of my need for specific detail and my forgetfulness. I was never called lazy, specifically, not that I remember. I don't remember ever being called lazy. I do remember being called hazy a lot. Spacey, that I needed to focus. Problem is that I was more than willing to do the work. If you gave me the instructions that I needed, I was there. I was doing it. I was right on top of it. I was more than happy to actually do work, especially manual labor. I was happy to do a task if you gave me the reason why and the how. If I didn't see a reason for it, why? Why am I doing this? Why am I going to waste this energy on this? If I don't see a reason, it's like with my specific questions. I need the why. I need the puzzle pieces. I need the picture. So if you're telling me to do something, along with the instructions, I need the why. Why am I going to do that? Because I need to have the setup in my brain that's going to give me more context for those instructions. So, pick up your clothes. Here is what would have been helpful. Pick up your clothes so I can wash them. Okay, in my brain, giving me the why. Okay, pick up clothes so I can wash them. Well, you wouldn't need to wash clean clothes, so pick up dirty clothes. Now, if I was younger and didn't have, experience doing this, I would probably say, where do you want them? In the hamper, in the washer? But it would narrow down the choices in my brain. When you don't give me a why, or you didn't give me specific instructions, there's too many possibilities going on in my brain. Pick up your clothes. Okay, but I have clean ones and dirty ones that I need to pick up. There are some that I still need to fold. There are some that aren't that dirty, probably just need to be hung up. There are some that I may put in my closet. There's some I may put in my wardrobe. There's too much going on. So I need you to help me narrow it down. Giving me the why, because I need to wash them, immediately narrows down half of those options. I can start looking much more clearly at what's left. So yes, I was more than willing to do the work. I just needed to be told my expectations and details more than other kids. As I mentioned, I loved to do things. I loved manual labor. My parents are both second-generation mechanics, and we live on a farm, so I was very happy there. I've done manual work my entire life, and they never forced me to do any of it. They strongly encouraged it, pitching around the house, chores, stuff like that, but I was more than willing to. I was always happy to get outside, always happy to build something, always happy to repair something. And I think a part of that was I got to see how things worked. I got to put things together. I got to tear them apart. I got to get my grubby little hands in there and just like... In combination with that, I was also a self-starter. As you can tell, I went after whatever grabbed my attention, especially book-wise. Big book nerd here, if that wasn't obvious. But not just book-wise, project-wise. As much as I loved seeing why and how things came together, I also loved seeing what they could turn into. So I was always trying to build things out of cardboard boxes, or the styrofoam that my toys actually came in. I have a picture of it somewhere. I built a castle out of the styrofoam that my dollhouse came packaged in, and I played more in that styrofoam castle that I built than I did the dollhouse. I was just experimenting and building and creating. One of my favorite activities was digging for rocks. I'm a big rock girl, music and geological wise. I love rocks. I would spend hours down here on the creek or at our river house just combing the bank for pebbles and rocks, whatever looked cool to me, and I would come back with not only hands full, but pockets bulging full of rocks. To my mom's credit, she has kept every single rock that I've brought back to the house. So this leads me up to probably my biggest point. Creativity. More than anything, I think personally, I've been extremely creative my entire life. That's not to call myself a Da Vinci or a James Cameron or that I'm some great artist, but I am creative. I am constantly creating things in my brain. I always have been, for as long as I can remember. There's hardly an hour in my life, I think, besides sleeping, that I haven't thought of something creative or creating something in my brain. I think all the time about creating things. Even as a child, this creativity mostly manifested, besides my little building projects, in writing or storytelling of some sort. I wrote my first story at age 3, and it's mostly pictures, but that's a story for another time. It's actually pretty dark, and that's just for another time. But I couldn't stop. I would make up literal... Okay, this is gonna be cringe, but I would literally role-play characters that I created. So, we live out in the country, and it takes a while to get places, and I would make up characters in my brain with these storylines as a kid, and while I was driving somewhere with my mom, I would tell her about these characters or these storylines, and like D&D or like theater, I would assign her a character, I would be a character, and we would just improv with this storyline, with these characters, the entire drive. And we would continue these. We'd have different places where we pick up from where we left off, and we would just continually improv based on these characters or these storylines that I was creating. And I wrote all of the time. All of the time. Anytime that I could get my grubby little hands on a pen or a pencil or a crayon or something that left a mark, God help you if you left paper or something that could be written on within my distance. I was always thinking about characters or plot lines, or especially dialogue. I'm big on dialogue and sound. Still, to this day, random phrases will pop up in my head, and I'll assign it to a character or a situation, and I'll have to bolt somewhere where I can write it down, because I'm like, God, that's so good! Or something will pop up and I'll start making a scene around it. So I also did a lot of theater. This was when I got a little bit older, but I did a lot of community theater. I did a lot of theater whenever our local church would have it. I did theater in school. Acting was, and still is, a huge love of mine because of that element of storytelling, right? Not just with the play, but with the character that you get to build your own story behind and see what the story is already behind. Acting was a huge love of mine, and I never played a part live on stage without improvising at least one line. Usually a lot more, but I would improvise at least one line that was not in the script. One of my weird gifts that I will compliment myself on, and this isn't bragging, just a compliment to myself, is I have an ability to quip in response, usually pretty quickly, which plays into my hand, even as a kid, in theater and in writing, just in life. So moving on, another great love was music. Obviously still is. I was obsessed with music. Talk about specificity and storytelling. I couldn't get enough of music. I listened to music all the time. In fact, my favorite picture of me as a kid is me with my Walkman and my first set of headphones, which are still hanging on the wall right there, and I use them to mix music because that is what I know sound best on. If you're curious, they're a pair of white Westinghouse headphones that came with a little Sony Walkman. Just crappy little plastic headphones, but they are what I developed my sound, what I developed my ears on. I listened to music as much as I wrote. Usually I did both at the same time. I memorized album after album, liner notes after liner notes, credits after credits. The analytical part of my brain not only hooked onto the storytelling parts of the songs, but the stories of how the songs came to be. I dug into how the bands operated, who was in the bands, how the bands came to be a band, what their history was. You named it about a band, any element, I learned it. So there was something that started happening when I was a kid and listened to a lot of music. Unpredictably, certain ways that things sounded in songs, and it could be any element of the song, the way that a singer sang a word, the way the kick drum hit a certain guitar riff, would elicit an extremely strong response in me. And it was akin to adrenaline. Like, it would make me want to, like, scream, or just, like, jump up and down, or pump my fist. Like, once that certain part would hit, it was just, ah! And I say certain part, it didn't have to be the same thing in every song. It was different things over many songs. But it's just, I would hear a certain sound, a certain element of that song, and it would just elicit this immediate just rush of adrenaline that would make me feel crazy, because I would look at other people and they'd be like, yeah, that was cool, but calm down. The easiest way I can describe it is like a more intense version of stimming. And I say more intense in the context of me, because my stimming usually is picking at my face, very unhealthy habit, or like moving my foot, tapping my foot, or like moving my fingers like this, or like tapping my fingers. Usually I'm tapping my foot. It was an extremely like intense response that I still get to this day, but I started noticing it as a kid. Now you might be saying, okay, you were an energetic kid with an over-imaginative imagination. True, but here's the juicy part. School. What was this little gremlin like in school? Well, I'm so glad you asked. Little Chey was the perfect kid to have in class. I was a straight A student, actually. A real pleasure to have in class. The kid that they wish they had 30 of. I did all my homework, I turned it in on time, I made constant good grades, and I was very bright. I was well behaved and respectful, minded all my manners, and I was friendly to all of my classmates. That's all well and good, but let me take you behind the scenes of all of that. As great as all this was not of little Chey's own volition. This was not a natural course of events. The only reason I even remembered to do my homework was because my mom enforced a structure on me. I would have to go home, and whenever I got home from school, I couldn't play outside, I couldn't play any games, I couldn't work on my projects until my homework was done. And she would check it to make sure. My mom was on top of me all the time to make sure that I brought home my study materials. She would make sure that I brought home any book that I might need in any subject for whatever homework I had. She made sure that I filled out my assignments in my agenda every single day, and if I didn't have anything, I would have to write that I didn't have anything that day. But she always made sure that I brought home whatever textbook that I had, that I might need for that assignment. She got suspicious if I didn't bring anything home at all, and she would call the teacher just to make sure that we didn't have anything assigned, or that I had finished my homework early in the class that day. And I want to mention, she was never cruel or mean about it. If I told her I didn't have anything, she wasn't like, oh, you're lying to me. Like, she never was gaslighting or anything like that. She was just making sure that I didn't forget things. She would say, are you sure? And of course, I usually responded, honestly, no, I'm not sure. And so she would call my teacher and be like, hey, just checking to make sure, does she have anything? And the teacher would usually say, no, she finished it earlier in class. So yes, my mom was never cruel or mean about it. I want to get that out there. I want to straighten that out. She was never helicopter, like, crazy about it. She was just very on top of things, providing that structure, because I wasn't gonna do it myself. And I was always learning, too. I genuinely wanted to learn everything, and I was lucky enough to have a capacity to do so. My parents would buy me workbooks for the next few grades ahead of me that I would work on over the summer. So if I was going into 3rd grade, my mom would buy me textbooks or workbooks for 4th, 5th, and 6th grades, and that's what I would work on during the summer. I would have assigned pages to get done by the end of the day when my parents got home that they would then check and review. And this wasn't because they forced it on me. They encouraged it, but I wanted to do it. I would even do more pages than I was assigned because I wanted to know, I wanted to learn, I wanted to do it. So a lot of summers I didn't spend hanging out with people. I spent inside working on science and biology and math, none of which I really use now. I devoured it, though, and I picked it up even the advanced subjects, I picked them up fairly easily. While this helped me in preparing me for the next grade level, it also was sort of a detriment, because this meant that I pretty much knew everything they were going to teach me that school year, and I finished all of my assignments early and had nothing else to do in class. I passed tests and finished homework with what was pretty much no effort compared to my classmates, and I was often left understimulated in class because I had already finished everything, because I would see what the teacher was teaching and be like, oh yeah, I know that, no worries, okay, da-da-da-da-da. I was allowed to keep books in my desk or doodle just to keep myself quiet. As I said, I remember little of this time from my life, especially compared to when I was older, but something I do remember quite vividly was how often I was in my own head, usually creating stories or storytelling of some sort. And this goes for the entirety of my life in school and just in life in general. I rarely paid attention. Not because I said,
screw this, I hate school, I cringe, I'm out of here. I already know everything, gosh.
But I was dreaming up worlds and characters and dialogue all the time. Or I'd be thinking about whatever usually was in front of me and how it related to something I was going to do after school or other things that were around me in the classroom. I'd be thinking about how tight my socks were, and the wasp outside the classroom window, and how many wasps can fit in a sock, and what happens if you fill a sock full of wasp, and can you swing it around? Will it start flying by itself? Huh. I never worried about spacing out and being called on by the teacher because, like I said, I was good grading-wise. I don't think they ever felt the need to call on me to see if I was paying attention because I was good on paper. So they were like, okay, yeah, whatever, we need to get these other kids that may not be getting this information, that may need a little bit more help with comprehension, that may need a little bit more attention, but she's good. Like, she's got it, she's good. We don't, whatever. Yeah, go off and doodle. That's fine. I was just allowed to skirt by, living on my own head, as long as my paper grades were satisfactory. Also, I don't know how, if you're one of my former teachers watching this, or one of my former classmates, I have a question. I talked a lot in class. I was always talking to the person sitting beside me or behind me. I was always talking, and yet I never, ever, ever, ever in my life remember being called out for it by a teacher. I never remember a teacher being like, hey, Cheyenne, shush, or like, hey, quiet down, we're trying to learn here. Never once in my life, but God help the person that I was talking to, because they would always get in trouble, or they would get called on if they dared, respond to me. I don't know why or how that happened. If I'm just a bad luck charm for classrooms for those people, but if you're one of my teachers or former classmates, please tell me if you remember this being a thing as well. Classmates, did I get called on and just not remember it? Because that's very possible. So I struggle with paying attention, with sitting still. In fact, the only thing I made a bad grade on in, I think, kindergarten, when they grade your manners and stuff like that, was I wasn't able to sit in my seat. I was constantly getting up, and I wouldn't sit in my seat correctly. I sat a lot on my feet, or sat on my knees a lot. But my biggest trouble was criticism. I couldn't take criticism. And it wasn't because I thought I was perfect, or thought I did nothing wrong, but if I was corrected, or if I thought there was a weird tone of voice to something that someone was saying, even if it was just a gentle correction, like, hey, you did a good job on this, but I just went, oh no. Anything that could be misinterpreted tone or word-wise, I took it like a spade to the gut. I was immediately overwhelmed, and I felt like just crawling in a hole and never coming out. I was spiraling. I just remember being overcome with shame. I felt sick, to be quite honest. But my teachers didn't see a lot of that. What they saw was the product, all of that coming out as the good, satisfactory grades on paper. So because of those good grades, they came for me. Who do you ask? The gifted program. I'm not sure what it's called now, and to be honest, I'm not entirely sure what this actual real name for it was back then, but it was the Gifted Accelerated Learners type program that a lot of schools have. They tested me when I was in 2nd grade, and after my testing, they recommended my mother to move me up into the 5th grade class. So from 2nd grade to 5th grade. 3 grade levels. Tiny Chey was like, yes, let me go, I am so excited. Luckily, my mother was much smarter and much more mature than Tiny Chey was, and she said, no. It wasn't because she thought I'd miss my friends or whatever. She just knew that would be a major leap in the social and emotional levels of people around me. An almost 7-year-old surrounded by middle school kids? That's just a lot of change to be surrounded by. And it wasn't that she didn't think I could handle it, it's just that that is a lot for a kid. It's just a lot. Especially out of the blue, because it was midway through the year and they just wanted to move me. So that would have been total culture shock. So yeah, I'm glad she kept me in 2nd grade because I may have been the next Sheldon Cooper. I'm just gonna go ahead and skip ahead to the teen years and college because you've gotten all the context, all the backstory. It pretty much stayed the same through middle school except with just added pressure of more homework and more assignments that made me a little bit more anxious and more paranoid to get everything correct. That way I didn't have to listen to everybody talk about I could have done better if I just focused. Teen years. I was still an analytical, outgoing kid. Still loved music, still loved writing, still constantly asked questions and learned everything I could. In school, I still kept up my good grades without putting in hardly any effort. And the same as earlier, I rarely paid attention in class because of, even if stuff was new, I picked it up pretty easily, and so I was left with a lot of time to just sit in my head and think. Still dreaming up scenarios and writing and all that. My interest got even broader though. I started studying several other languages. I started learning about America's military and all the special forces, and especially delved into studying different periods in history. I was still a well-behaved kid, but I was starting to differ a little bit in my social life, as you would expect, because when you reach middle school is when you start really getting into a social life, start hanging out with friends besides playdates at school, maybe you start dating as much as middle schoolers can date. Another little element that I forgot to mention in school, though I did make good grades, the one complaint my teachers did have about my work is that even if I got everything right, I would make tiny little careless mistakes. So forgetting commas was a big one, or forgetting punctuation, or I'd forget to write my name, or I would accidentally write the wrong mathematical symbol for the problem, or I would forget to write a 1 on the 12 even though I did all the other math correctly. So they could see what I meant to do, but it was just careless little mistakes that would dock me points even if I got every other thing correct. So in middle school and high school, I had a lot of friends, but very few close ones. I love talking to people. Pretty much too much. I overshared a lot. I talked a lot and I talked loudly. I'd interject or come off so headstrong that a lot of people were overwhelmed, I think, or put off. I was a lot. Whenever there was something to talk about, I talked about it in 10 different other subjects that it made me think of. I shared my own personal experiences, I shared my emotions. I just loved talking to people. I loved being with people. I'd make a lot of jokes and do whatever I could to get into the conversation, to be involved in the conversation. I wasn't good at reading social cues or people's tolerance levels because, number one, I was still growing and maturing. Number two, I was just excited to be there and to be talking to people. I was a lot, and I didn't get invited to a lot of places, like, ever, actually. Parties, hanging out with people outside of school, except for those few close friends I had. Nothing. And that's not to say that people hated me or that people disliked me. I understand relationships at that age level are complicated and complex, so I don't have any ill feelings towards people in that aspect. I know I was a lot. I accept that, but I also don't put any fault anymore on myself for that either. I was told more than once that I was a lot and just intense. In fact, at Tennessee Girls State, which I attended. In our little group, the counselors or the group leaders made these little necklaces for all the students in our group that had 2 words that described that person that they gave it to and were compliments for that person's personality. So people got kind, humorous, a lot of people got caring, empathetic, sweet, some people got like nurturing. Those words. Do you know what mine were? Do you know what my 2 words were? Strong, thorough. Which, you know what? I'll take that. Heck yeah, I'll take that. Thorough. That's a kind way to say I never shut my trap. I also started getting more responsibilities in school. Longer papers, clubs, and don't even get me started on starting to apply to college. It took a full effort on my mom's part to help me make sure that I got all of it done and kept all of it straight. I would spend hours on assignments to get them done, and I was even more paranoid because, as I said, and it followed me, I made so many careless mistakes, especially in math or English and reading. So I would spend hours, like, paranoid, anxious over these assignments, being like, okay, I need to make sure that I have all the periods in the right place. Like, does that need an exclamation point? Does that need a new paragraph? Did I remember to show my math and carry the 1 on the whatever? And it was hard to focus on these assignments. I didn't want to be doing them. I just wanted them to be done. And a way that I found to do that was listening to music while I worked. That really helped me. I got into a bad habit of picking at my skin and picking at my face, a habit which I'm still pretty bad at, but I would listen to music to help with that while I was working on things. Something that really helped me was the Lord of the Rings soundtrack, the Hobbit soundtrack, especially when I was in high school. That's when the Hobbit movies started coming out. And the Hobbit movie soundtrack was something I listened to on repeat, especially when I was writing essays. Because of these simple mistakes, I'd say it definitely developed itself into a sort of perfectionism with that anxiety. I was worried about being perfect, and yes, I needed specific instructions when I was a kid, but it got even worse as I got older because of just the mountain of simple mistakes and, well, why didn't you do this, and disappointed looks that I got when I was a kid. It just all snowballed because I got so many, you could do better, we know you could do better because you have done better, so how could you make a mistake like this, or how could you not understand this, or how did you get this wrong? It felt like I was too stupid to be smart, or too smart to be this stupid, is what it felt like. Because they would see me get all these good grades on everything in the past, and then when I didn't understand something, it was like, oh my gosh, the world's ending. Why don't you understand this? You understood the other past 10 things, and I was ashamed. Like, I felt imposter syndrome. I didn't know what that was at the time, but I was like, gosh, am I stupid? I must be stupid because stuff isn't, like, I just don't understand. And this really, really showed itself in college, right? Because I started learning a lot of things that I had no basis for, and stuff wasn't coming as easily to me. And so, in both high school and college is just where it got to sort of an extreme. Because I started having all these new responsibilities and independence put on me where I had to provide the total structure for myself. And I'm getting off topic, so let me try and reel Chey back in. I can't operate without structure. That manifests itself in needing specific instructions. It manifests itself in needing to write down lists, to talk to myself out loud, to have some sort of basis, because I can't conjure up steps for something I've never done in my brain. I think I heard a person describe it once as, if you've never made a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, typically, like, there are some people who, if they've made a sandwich before, or if they know what a peanut butter jelly sandwich is, you tell them to make one, they can picture the steps in their head. Get the bread, get the peanut butter, get the jelly. They can see it putting it together in their brains. But some people, that's me, I'm like, okay, but what step first? Do I bread first, jelly first, peanut butter first? How much jelly? How much peanut butter? I have all these questions. I can't just see it in my brain without specific instructions or the why or the context. So I need structure. And in college, I really suffered because, yes, I was independent in a lot of things in high school. I was self-sufficient in a lot of ways. My mom made sure of that. But where I went to in DC, I went to Georgetown University from a little hick school that I love dearly in rural Tennessee to Georgetown University. That's a huge culture shock. I don't think all of the self-sufficiency in the world could have prepared me for that level of culture shock. And so the structure that I needed, I was scrambling to try and figure out. Because I'm a first-generation college student, so I was on my own there. My parents couldn't help me. I was on my own there. And so that was structure I was scrambling for. Also, there was new material that I had no context for that I was trying to learn. There was a brand new city, new people, new cultures. It's a lot. All of this trying to scramble to find structure and figure it out just exacerbated all of my other symptoms that had already been showing themselves in high school. So, my criticism, simple mistakes, perfectionism, all came to a head. Perfectionism, I was so outdone by everyone around me at GU. There were so many just intelligent, bright people who had taken 10 IB classes, came from the world's top elite private schools. I just felt completely dwarfed in brain cells. I felt like little pea brain compared to these people. And from high school, I had that snowball that followed me into college where I had the ghost of past small mistakes haunting me. I knew that I was already in danger of constantly making small mistakes and always trying to correct them, always trying to get something perfect. That way, even if I did, literally my mindset was, I know there are going to be some small mistakes somewhere in this that I'm going to make. So I need to make everything else as perfect as it can possibly be. I just set unrealistic standards for myself because I had been told my entire life I have an uncommon intelligence, I have an uncommon ability to absorb and retain information. So when I started not producing the results that I had earlier, I thought of myself, I'm like, well, I'm not normal people, so why can't I do this? I'm a failure. Like, I'm ashamed of myself. I'm a failure. Just constantly thinking, like, why can't I do this? Repeating in my head what people had been repeating to me of just disbelief and disappointment of, why can't you do this? But also added into my head, what's wrong with me? I've been told this my entire life that, yeah, I'm good, I can do this, so why can't I now? What's wrong with me? What happened? I've tricked them all. I've fooled them all. They're fools. I've completely fooled them. I've completely tricked them. Joke's on them. I'm actually not that smart. I'm stupid if I keep doing this, if I keep failing. And so I just developed a major imposter syndrome, major anxiety, major perfectionism and paranoia. And I burned out all the time. I was depressed a lot because I was surrounded by these people that it seemed like I had more things in common with when I was younger. They got things easily. They understood things. They excelled in their grades. Meanwhile, I'm over here struggling to write a 250-word response paper, and they're out here cranking 7,000-word essays like it's that. I nearly dropped out. Literally, like, within 2 months, I nearly dropped out. Luckily, my favorite professor, who came to be my favorite professor and sort of a mentor to me, if he's watching this, he knows who he is. He yelled at me for 10 minutes about why I needed to stay at Georgetown, and I did. Because of him, I graduated, so thank you. You know who you are. He's not going to watch this far into the video, so it'll be fine. Some things I did to try and help cope with myself in college was doodling. I doodled a lot. I was fidgeting a lot. My face was so broken out and so scarred up from constantly scratching and picking at myself. And with the doodling, this professor that I just mentioned, bless him to the moon and back, because we had a guest professor once that was speaking in class, and I was doodling the entire time she was talking, and I heard her mention to him outside of class, like, hey, like, and she wasn't mean about it. I will say that she was not mean about it, but she was like, hey, like, do you think that she was paying attention? Like, I noticed that she was drawing the entire time. And he told her, I forget exactly how he worded it. He said, but when she's drawing is like when she's paying attention. Like, she paid more attention to you than probably half the kids in that class. And I just felt so validated. He never mentioned a word of it to me, but I felt really validated and I really appreciated it. So yeah, a lot of stress, a lot of imposter syndrome, a lot of gifted kid burnout. I hate using the term gifted kid. That's the part of bragging on myself that I'm talking about. But I burned out so much, and I switched majors a lot, which is, again, not uncommon, but I would use all of my energy towards this thing, and then when it wouldn't work out like I wanted to, or the steps weren't clear enough, or it wasn't worth the why. I couldn't figure out a why, and so I would turn to something else. Something to mention, I also had and still have my intense responses to music that I'm just going to refer to as stimming now, intense stimming 2.0, and I really just embraced it. I used to be embarrassed about it, but that's for another video. Something that I forgot to mention that I really didn't start noticing until middle school and high school was sometimes I needed complete silence, and the slightest noise during a test would, like, make me want to punch someone in the face. If I was, like, sitting there trying to read something, trying to comprehend something on a test, and I heard someone, like, shuffle their shoe, I just wanted to take their shoe off and, like, hit them in the head with it. I was like, shut up, just shut up. And this happened a lot at my house, too. I was a horrible sleeper up until about a year ago. I am an incredibly light sleeper. The slightest noise will wake me up. I have never had, like, I've had sleep, but I've never slept super deeply until about a year ago when I got earplugs to sleep with. Very hypersensitive to sound, very hypersensitive to feelings. And this especially followed me into college because dorms are not quiet places, and so I would just bundle myself with blankets, like, around my head, or I would shove my head into a pillow and work on my work, because I couldn't go anywhere else on campus because it was too noisy. I couldn't do it. It drove me crazy. I needed to focus, and the best way I could focus to minimize that noise was sitting in my room, surrounded by fluffy, or listening to music, listening to ambient noise, and working on my work. In fact, one of my favorite Chey moments, and I can post proof of this, my favorite playlist to study and read and get work done to was relaxing World War I combat sounds. My boyfriend tried to call me once on Discord, and I legitimately responded to him, hold on, I need to turn off my war sounds. And he thought that was the funniest thing on earth, and to be honest, out of context, it very much is. How did I get diagnosed? Well, Georgetown did a very good thing during the pandemic for students that lived on campus. What they did was they offered free telehealth therapy for kids living on campus. As we were in a worldwide pandemic, I was a senior that was writing not one, but 2 theses, and dealing with about to graduate anxiety and no idea what I was doing with my life. I was like, yeah, baby, let's go get therapized. Let's go to therapy. So I had never been to therapy before. It was a really interesting experience for me, and my therapist was the sweetest guy imaginable. We talked about a lot of things, and one of the things we were talking about is, of course, things that were bothering me in the moment. And a lot of it was anxiety, as you can imagine, about the world. And I talked about my stress in school, my struggles in school, my sensitivity to criticism, which I got a lot of at Georgetown because I did not meet the expectations of my professors in comparison to my classmates. Guess who failed both economics courses and only passed by a curve? We talked about that. We talked about so much. We talked about my past in school and how it's correlated to my experience in college. So we talked about two major things that we covered were I couldn't find a job in my field that I actually wanted to do, that I wanted to be a part of, and how I hated my thesis or felt like I was hating my thesis. And We talked about these things in depth over a couple of sessions, maybe 2 or 3, and I had a realization after breaking all of it down. The main reason I couldn't stand my thesis was not the thesis itself, it was the process. And this was related to why I couldn't find a career that I wanted to do in history or politics or whatever. Why I couldn't find a job that suited me. And it was because of my need for specificity and my need for why and results. What I mean by that is, specifically with my thesis, I hated the process of having to sit there for hours and read something. Now, it wasn't because I wasn't interested in it. Very interested in my topic. Love my topic. Still may write on it later in life. But I couldn't stand sitting there reading through hundreds of sources and then the possibility of not even using them. The thought of reading a 300-page book and then being like, well, that was useless, on to the next one. No, why? Why would I do that? That's a lot of energy. I don't care about someone's analysis on Roman history. Like, do you know how hard it was for me to read 2 to 20 pages of that for class in a week? You expect me to read a 300-page book about something I may not even use in a day? Why? I couldn't see a why. No one could tell me a good why. I couldn't picture the steps. I couldn't picture the finish line in my brain for what that may look like, because if it's of no use to me, if it could be of no use to me, then why am I going to do it? I don't understand why I would do it if it could be of no use to me. If I couldn't see, I realized the common thread with the thesis in my career, of choosing my career, is that if I couldn't see a product for the end of it, if I couldn't see a tangible or have a tangible product, why am I doing it? I don't like it. I can't stand something if I don't see, like, some sort of physical, tangible product. Now, you could argue at the end of the thesis I would have a tangible product. Yes, but I would suffer in misery throughout that process of 1,000 little instances of having nothing to show for it. As in, reading those sources and then never using them. Until I found ones that I did. And the same with the career. I couldn't find anything in history, being a historian, or being an analyst, that I wanted to do, because there were no products that I would get at the end of the day that mattered to me. The closest I could find was being an archaeologist, because I would have something to show for it. I would dig up something, but again, too much paperwork for me. Why would I do that? Just let me play with the rocks. Let me play with the rocks. Let me play with the bones. Let me be Indiana Jones. And as we got to talking, I said, I think I want to be a studio engineer. This is a longer story for later, but we got to talking and I realized part of wanting to be an engineer, he asked me what was different from being an engineer versus being a historian, and it's because I have something to show for it at the end of the day. I need something tangible, right? So, engineer, even if we end up scrapping all the songs that we recorded that day, I can still see that we recorded something. We had something. We did something. I set things up. We did something. That makes sense to me. I can see the why. I see the why. I know the how. I did it. I get it. Love it. At the end of this session, talking about that, he looked at me and he said, have you ever been evaluated for ADHD? And I said, no. Because I thought ADHD was for children, mainly for rowdy boys. No one had ever brought up the possibility of me having ADHD ever. And so I said, no. And he said, okay, I'm going to send you a few pre-evaluations, take them and get back to me. Every single evaluation that I took was blaringly red on the alarm scale for possibility of ADHD. They were all screaming at me to go get tested. So, I went and got tested. It was not an easy ordeal, though, because he couldn't do it, because he was just a therapist. He wasn't licensed for the testing process, or whatever that process is. And he tried to help me, the poor guy, but because I lived in DC at the time, every single psychologist, testing center, I'm not kidding you, I called one place and I said, how much is your ADHD evaluation, like testing for adults?
$8,000.
That's 1/10 of my tuition at Georgetown that I didn't have to pay because I was poor and they put me on scholarship. $8,000. I said, okay, thank you. And the rest were about $5,000. around that, every single one of them. And so I went to Georgetown. So I was in the first generation and low income scholars program, Georgetown Scholars Program, and I find out that they have a partnership sort of thing for like ADHD neurodivergent testing. And through them, I got my testing paid for, except I think they paid everything else that my insurance wouldn't pay, because my insurance paid for a little bit of it, and I think they paid for the rest of it. But either way, I was very lucky. I was very blessed on that end. So Georgetown Scholars Program, GSP, love you guys, would do anything for y'all. Y'all go support them if you can. They're amazing. So I got tested, and I literally talked this man out of thinking I had ADHD. Not that, okay, let me rephrase that. I wasn't trying to go in there and get an ADHD diagnosis. That wasn't my goal. I literally did just want to get tested because I had no idea what to expect. But this man himself told me I talked him out of thinking I had ADHD because I had, after the testing, like, process, halfway through the process, we talked, and he seemed, like, suspicious, but I didn't say anything, and we did, like, the family history, the peer evaluations of, like, my attitude and my habits as a kid and all that. And then after the testing process, when he diagnosed me, he told me straight up, he said, you have a verbal intelligence level of the 99th percentile. And I said, okay, why are you telling me this? And he said, because, he goes, the way you talk to me, the way that you handled certain testing, the attention that you paid in your comprehension skills, he goes, I didn't even understand why you were sent to me for an ADHD, like, evaluation, and, like, the way that you presented yourself, the way you presented your interest. He goes, I didn't see, besides just rampant talking, why you would be sent to me for ADHD. But the testing proved him otherwise, and he was like, oh my god, she can just talk a big game. So I literally talked this man into thinking that I don't have ADHD until the testing showed otherwise, and also the fact that he told me at first he thought it was situational anxiety. That, because ADHD has a lot of symptoms that can be manifestations of other comorbid conditions, and so he thought it was situational anxiety. It would go away once I graduated college, 6 months out. But after more testing, and after he looked at my history and my evaluations, and that these same symptoms had been present my entire life, not just in this situation, he was convinced that I had both types of ADHD, which is inattentive and hyperactive. I was going to make a little part about what life is like for me right now, but I think this video has gone on long enough. I'll probably make another video if anyone's curious about more specific strategies that I do now that I know I have ADHD, what I do to help myself, but I'll just give a little TDLR. So now that I know I have ADHD, I try to be much kinder to myself. I'm much more self-aware of certain habits and certain ways that I react to things, especially because I didn't have a framework, like I said, for ADHD, because no one had ever brought up the possibility of me having it. And this doctor told me, he said, and I'll have to find the specific studies for it, but he was telling me, yes, a late diagnosis is not surprising for a female like you, because typically young males get recommended for testing because they act out, they're rowdy, they're a problem. He goes, girls are typically mature faster, they have more societal expectations put on them to behave, and so they do, and they are hyperactive, it's just in their heads. They're hyperactive in their heads. And I was like, well, that makes a lot of sense. And he said, typically, with males, they see, because they're rowdy and more physically hyperactive, they also don't do well in school. With girls, with new studies, because they're just now testing women with ADHD to see what symptoms are as comparison to boys, because they were using testing standards and symptoms of boys from the 1950s to diagnose women and other minorities, other gender identities. And he said, typically what we're finding is that women, and again, this is his word, and I think there are some studies on this, and if I find them, I'll post them, but this is what he told me. He said, typically with women, we're finding that they do well. in school. They don't have to be gifted kids, they don't have to make all straight A's, but typically they do better in school than the male counterparts who get sent for testing earlier. And typically the symptoms in women only exacerbate women or other gender identities, I should say. Sorry. Typically, non-male individuals who have ADHD don't start showing symptoms or don't start exacerbating symptoms until later in life when they have more expectations, more responsibilities put onto them. What I'm doing now, like I said, I'm more self-aware. I'm constantly researching into what I can do to help myself. I'm trying to pay attention to myself more in the way I react to things, and just generally be kinder to me. I know that there's nothing wrong with me, though sometimes it is hard to believe that, because when you don't operate in a way that so much of the world does, because the world wasn't designed for you, it's hard to feel like you're not a mistake. It really is. And I don't look at ADHD as a superpower. I know some people do, but I don't look at it as a superpower. I don't look at it as a curse. I see it as a different operating system. I see it as a different OS. So again, I'll make a video probably later about specific strategies that I use to help myself and what it looks like now that I'm out of a school structure. Spoiler alert, life has gotten harder. But it's also still very much enjoyable. But for now, this video has gone on long enough. If you've stayed until the very end, you are a friggin' trooper, my dude. I respect and I love you so much. So much. It has been a rough day today. I got some rough news at the beginning of the day and I didn't feel like filming, but I wanted to film this video anyway. And it's October 5th when I'm filming this, and I usually wouldn't date my videos, but I'm going to this one anyway because today is the 4-year anniversary of the first time I saw Beartooth live and met them, and my life changed forever. And I'm going to extend this video by a little bit as a shout out to Caleb Shomo, the frontman of Beartooth, who also has ADHD, and I won't put the clip in here. I have the clip saved, but I won't put it in here because it's his stream. In his stream, whenever COVID was happening and we were all shut up, he did a stream. I was one of the regulars on stream, so he knew me a little bit. He knew me from his server and whatever. And I mentioned to someone in chat that, like, my therapist was wanting me to get evaluated for ADHD, and I was not depressed, but I was a little bit scared because I didn't know what this meant. This was a whole new world to me. I was overwhelmed and kind of freaking out, just a little bit. I wasn't panicking, but I was like, I don't know what life is going to look like now. I feel like my whole world has been like, hey. And I mentioned it to someone in chat, and Caleb saw it, and he stopped for, and I'm getting emotional right now, but he stopped for like 2 to 3 minutes and just like talked to me. And he told me that, you know, he had ADHD since he was a young child and that he's been dealing with it too, and there's nothing wrong with us, there's nothing wrong with ADHD people, and if I have it, you know, it's fine, like, I'm gonna be okay, and like, I just have to find, it's hard to find your thing, but once you find your thing, you've got it. Like, it'll be like what you cling to, you'll be fine, and for him, his was music, and I knew mine was music too. Again, just a little tidbit, and you can... I'm gonna stop before I start crying, but a little thing, but it meant a lot to me that he did that, because he didn't have to. So, I'm really appreciative of that, and I'm really appreciative of you if you've stuck around this long. Thank you so much for watching. If you haven't heard it from anyone else today, I love you. Love and peace. Until tomorrow.